Welcome to Hampton Bay Stories. If you enjoy this series, we invite you to subscribe to our channel or explore our books on your preferred online book retailer. This story is called Fair Game. It is an origin story for a second chance by Denise Nichols. The chandelier in the Hale residence glowed softly against the polished mahogany floors, throwing Ursula's reflection into 1,000 fractured shards. She smoothed the skirt of her silk gown and leaned against the balcony rail, the evening air heavy with the scent of magnolia drifting in from the gardens below. This was Ursula's life, elegant, beautiful, and respectable. The life of an admiral's wife. She smiled when she heard Gregory's laughter drift from the drawing room. Deep, commanding, it filled the space like the toll of a naval bell. Guests always hung on his words. The great Admiral Hale, decorated and untouchable. And she, his wife, the woman who had stood loyally at his side through deployments and lonely nights, through award and ceremonies. And yet, she could not silence the whispers from the guests at the party. He was seen in Norfolk again, dining with a woman half his age. Ursula pressed her hand against her stomach as if she could still the ache inside her. She loved him. God help her, she loved him, but every time the rumor surfaced, she felt a little piece of herself slip away. The door opened and Gregory stepped onto the balcony, his uniform jacket unbuttoned, his chest gleaming with medals. He slipped a hand around her waist with the easy confidence of a man who believed nothing could shake him. He kissed her neck. "Ursula," he said warmly, pressing his lips against her temple, "our guests are asking for you." She forced a smile and leaned into him, letting the warmth of his touch cover her doubts. To the world, they were perfect. Admiral Hale and his radiant wife. But inside, Ursula's heart whispered the question she dared not say aloud. How many more secrets could she endure before the love she clung to finally broke? Ursula's hand slipped over Gregory's, resting on the polished mahogany rail. From the garden below came the hum of cicadas, steady as a heartbeat. She closed her eyes and for a moment imagined what her life might have been if things had gone differently. 3 times she had carried his child. 3 times she had wept alone in the still, suffocating silence of their room when her body betrayed her. Each loss had hollowed her, leaving her weaker, quieter, until Gregory had stopped even speaking of children. He had wanted a son, his heir, his legacy. And she had failed him. The doctors told her it wasn't her fault, that sometimes the body simply refused to hold what the heart longed for. But Gregory's eyes, cold in those days after each loss, had told her everything. Disappointment. Distance. The shame of a man whose perfect world did not include an imperfect wife. She had given up more than children for him. Opportunities, dreams. The degree she had left unfinished, the independence she had once imagined, all of it abandoned to become the officer's wife, his ornament, his hostess. She had thought love was enough. That being his was enough. But the whispers about the other women continued, just loud enough for Ursula to hear. Ursula swallowed hard, straightening her shoulders as Gregory's arm tightened possessively around her waist. To the world, they were dazzling. Inside, she felt as fragile as the crystal glasses sparkling on the table behind them. Ursula Fassad began to crack luncheon for naval wives. She was always the center of attention because there was the wife of an admiral, but this time it was different. "Ursula, I wasn't sure if I should tell you this." Her friend Marjorie, another naval wife, leaned in close across the china and lace, her pearls trembling slightly as she lowered her voice. "I was in Richmond last week, meeting a cousin. I saw Gregory." Ursula's fork paused midair. "Gregory?" "At the base." Marjorie's expression was pitying. "Not at the base, dear. At a bar. With a woman. It was not the first time, I'm afraid." The words sliced through Ursula's composure like a blade. She forced a laugh, brittle and hollow. "Gregory entertains officers all the time. You must be mistaken." But she knew Marjorie was not mistaken. Too many whispers. Too many nights alone. Marjorie touched her hand. "Ursula dear, there's a man, a private investigator. Former Navy, very discreet. He can tell you the truth, whatever it is. His name is Takeo James." Ursula hesitated to go down this road. he would be acknowledging that Gregory had found another, that her marriage was over. But she could not continue this way. When Ursula finally agreed to meet Takeo James, she understood why Marjorie had called him discreet. Takeo was reserved to the point of silence, his dark eyes watchful but not prying. He was striking, tall, broad-shouldered, his caramel skin drawn tight over muscles that spoke of years in special ops. His features carried the elements of both his Japanese and African-American heritage. Handsome, yes, but in a way that was almost intimidating, like a statue come to life. And yet when he spoke, his voice was low and careful, almost shy. "I don't deal in rumors," he told her as they sat across from one another in a quiet Hampton Bay cafe. "If you want the truth, I'll bring it to you. But you need to be prepared for what I'll find." Ursula, her hands trembling in her lap, met his gaze. "I've been living with whispers behind my back long enough. I want to know." For days, her heart beat in dread as Takeo shadowed Gregory. Each night Gregory came home late, smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't hers. The dread deepened. And then Takeo delivered the envelope. He set it on her table of a remote cafe he wanted to meet at. He wanted no witnesses. Takeo's expression was unreadable, but his eyes soft with pity. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Hale." Inside the envelope were photographs, receipts, hotel records. Photos of Gregory with Cheryl Morgan. Gregory's payments for Janelle Moore's townhouse. Gregory, with the child Janelle, had borne him. As Ursula stared at the evidence, her breath catching in her chest, the world tilted. She pressed the papers to her heart as though she could smother the pain, but it was no use. Her marriage, her sacrifices, her love, had all been built on lies. Ursula's fingers shook as she spread the papers across the table. Receipts, rental agreements, photographs, and then the copy of the deed. It was a deed for a 3-bedroom townhouse near Richmond, purchased under a second mortgage Gregory had assumed without her knowledge. There, in crisp snapshots, was Janelle Moore, blonde hair, beautiful and younger than Ursula by only a few years. In one photo, she held a boy in her arms, a child with Gregory's eyes. Ursula's vision blurred. Gregory had not only betrayed her, but he had also given someone else what she desired the most, a home. A son, a family. Her breath hitched as the paper trembled in her hand. She thought of her own empty womb, the nights spent sobbing after miscarriages while Gregory turned colder with each loss. He had wanted an heir. And now, with Janelle, he had one. Takeo shifted, his large frame taut with discomfort. His voice was soft, careful. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Hale. I wouldn't have brought this to you if it weren't true." Ursula could not answer. She crushed the photo of the child, her body shaking. The life she had bled for, sacrificed for, clung to through humiliation and loneliness. Gregory had given it away to another woman. And for the first time, Ursula wondered if she had the strength to keep pretending she was the Admiral's perfect wife. The next morning, Ursula sat in the cool sterility of the doctor's office, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The smell of antiseptic and paper gowns clung to the air. Again, the doctor flipped through her charts with a calm, detached smile. "Everything looks normal, Ursula. Perfectly healthy. Your hormone levels are where they should be for a woman of 36. Nothing here would explain why you have not gotten pregnant again." She nodded, her throat tight. Perfectly healthy. Perfectly fine. Then why had her body betrayed her 3 times? Why had she never been able to give Gregory the son he wanted? When she stepped outside into the sunlight, the truth felt heavier than ever. Gregory had bought Janelle a home. He had given her a child. He had lived a second life in Richmond while Ursula hosted dinners and smiled at banquets. And yet, he had never left her. Why stay married to a woman who had failed him again and again? Why keep up the charade of devotion when his true family lived an hour away? The questions gnawed at her as she walked back to her car, the weight of the folder Takeo had given her pressing against her side. Love? Duty? Appearances? She could not tell anymore. All she knew was that her marriage, the one she had sacrificed everything for, had never been what she thought it was. And still, she couldn't let it go. She sat in her car outside the clinic, staring at the white envelope of test results in her lap. Normal. Every number, every test, normal. So why hadn't she carried a child since the last miscarriage? Why hadn't she conceived again when Gregory's son with Janelle was living proof the fault wasn't his? Ursula pressed her hand against her belly, willing it to answer. Why not me? Why never me? She cried. The confusion hollowed her, sharp as grief. If her body was fine, if her chances were still good, then what remained? Was it God's punishment? Some hidden flaw that no test could reveal? She clenched the steering wheel until her knuckles whitened. The question looped endlessly in her mind. Why was she still here? Why was she still his wife? And beneath all of it, another truth bled quietly through. She still loved him. Even now. Then the crack in her facade became a chasm. The first time Ursula saw Cheryl Morgan in person, it was not in the photographs, but at a Naval Wives luncheon in Hampton Bay. Ursula had dressed carefully in a red silk blouse and pearls, armor as much as attire. She told herself she was here to be seen, to remind the circle she was still the Admiral's wife, unshaken by rumor. And then she saw her. Cheryl swept into the room as if she owned it, her crimson dress clinging to her hips, her laugh spilling out like champagne. Heads turned. Some women whispered. Others pretended not to notice. Cheryl thrived in that tension, her chin lifted as though she enjoyed the sting of disapproval. Ursula's pulse quickened. She had memorized her face from the photographs. Now here she was, flesh and blood, bold as sin. Their eyes met across the room. For a moment, neither woman blinked. Then Cheryl's lips curved into the faintest smirk. Not mockery exactly, more like a private acknowledgement. Yes, I know who you are. And yes, I don't care. Ursula forced herself to turn back to her teacup, her hands trembling so slightly the porcelain rattled against its saucer. Later, in the powder room, she heard Cheryl's voice before she saw her reflection in the mirror. Pearls. Classic choice. Cheryl's eyes slid over Ursula in the glass. A little safe, maybe. But safe has its place, doesn't it? Ursula lifted her chin. I suppose it depends on what one values. Stability. Respect. Cheryl's smile deepened, amused. And what about excitement? Isn't that worth something too? The air between them pulsed with unspoken truths. Neither was named Gregory. Neither had to. When Ursula finally walked out, her back straight, her heart was hammering. For the first time, she realized Gregory's betrayals weren't faceless rumors. They had names, voices, smiles sharp enough to cut. In the weeks that followed, it was impossible to avoid Cheryl. She appeared everywhere, at luncheons, at the supermarket, even at the same boutique Ursula had frequented for years. Always in colors that demanded notice. Always with laughter that carried too far. And always with that look. Not pity. Not an apology. Delight. Ursula felt it like a sting each time their eyes met. Cheryl's smile curved, faintly mocking, as if to say, I know your secret. I know he chose me too. One night, when Gregory returned home reeking of perfume that wasn't hers, Ursula pressed her nails into her palms and swallowed her questions. She said nothing. She only smiled as she had always smiled, poured his brandy, and listened to his stories of the day. But inside, she could still hear Cheryl's laughter. For her, it was a game. At teas and luncheons, Cheryl would arrive late, just late enough to draw every eye, and sweep past Ursula with a smile that bordered on intimate. Once, she bent to kiss Ursula's cheek in greeting, her lips brushing the air, her perfume thick with roses. Lovely to see you, she murmured, her voice pitched low so only Ursula could hear. Gregory always did say you had exquisite taste. The word struck like a blade slipped between ribs. Ursula's composure held, but her teacup rattled against its saucer as Cheryl floated away. The cruelty was never loud, never open. Always in smiles, in glances, in words feathered with venom that no one else would hear. Ursula began to dread stepping out of her own home. Every gathering was a battlefield. Every glance from Cheryl was a fresh humiliation. And Gregory? He never denied it. Never defended her. He carried on as if Ursula's silence was consent, as if her loyalty was infinite. But what cut deepest was that Cheryl seemed to enjoy it, to relish Ursula's suffering. One afternoon, Ursula caught her outside the milliner's, examining a row of feathered hats. Cheryl turned, saw her, and smiled. "Admiral's wife," Cheryl said lightly, as though it were a title to mock. "You wear pearls. I wear rubies. He likes them both, you know." The audacity left Ursula trembling. She said nothing, only lifted her chin and swept past, her heels clicking sharp against the pavement. But once inside, she clutched the counter, her breath shaking, her pride in tatters. Cheryl's laughter followed her, still, bright and cruel, ringing in her ears like a victory bell. As much as it hurt, Ursula needed to know more. Takeo's photographs had shown her the exterior, but curiosity, or perhaps masochism, drove her to see it herself. One gray afternoon, she parked her car across the street and watched. The townhouse sat on the river outside Richmond, its wide porch gleaming with fresh paint, windows tall and proud, a dock stretching into the water where a small boat rocked gently against its moorings. It was the kind of place Ursula had once imagined for herself, a home for summers, a place for children to run barefoot in the grass, for holidays around a roaring hearth. But it belonged to Janelle Moore, not Ursula. Ursula sat in her car across the street, her fingers curled around the steering wheel. She knew she shouldn't be here, but she couldn't stop herself. Takeo's photographs had only told part of the story. She had to see it with her own eyes. The door opened. Janelle stepped onto the porch, sunlight catching the gloss of her golden hair. She was younger than Ursula by only a handful of years, but she carried herself with an easy grace, the kind that drew eyes without demanding them. A looker. Beautiful in a natural way that needed no pearls, no airs. Beside her ran a boy, laughing, chasing a ball across the lawn. 6 years old. Gregory's son. His dark hair caught the light. His grin was wide, fearless. He darted down toward the dock, and Janelle called after him, her voice warm, firm, loving. Ursula's chest tightened. She had imagined Janelle plain, ordinary. She had prayed she would be. But she was not. She was everything Ursula was not, fertile, radiant, secure in the life Gregory had carved out for her. The boy turned, and for a fleeting moment, Ursula saw Gregory in the line of his jaw, the tilt of his chin. Proof undeniable. Her throat closed. She pressed her nails into her palm, fighting the wave of nausea that rose inside her. Gregory had not just strayed. He had built a future here. A family. A legacy. And yet, he had stayed married to her. The question twisted in Ursula's mind until it nearly broke her. Why? Ursula drove away before she could be seen, her stomach twisting, her mind burning with questions she could not answer. A few weeks later, the Naval Academy ballroom shimmered with polished brass and polished manners. Ursula moved through the room at Gregory's side, her emerald gown catching the soft glow of the chandeliers. She smiled, laughed, and tilted her head at the right moments. The perfect wife. Then the doors opened. Cheryl Morgan entered, red silk sweeping behind her, her chin high. The hum of conversation faltered, eyes followed her like iron to a magnet. She did not belong here, yet she moved with the ease of one who knew she had every reason to be noticed. Ursula felt Gregory tense beside her. His hand tightened painfully at her waist. Before she could retreat, Cheryl was upon them. Admiral Hale. Cheryl's smile gleamed as she let her gaze flick over Ursula, dismissive, before locking on Gregory. You look commanding as always. Ursula's breath caught. Around them, wives stiffened and officers exchanged looks. Gregory opened his mouth, but no words came. His face was pale, his eyes darting from Cheryl to Ursula to the growing circle of onlookers. And then Ursula's voice, soft, steady. Gregory. Gregory staggered, his hand to his chest. Ursula caught his arm, panic rising. Gregory, she cried. Gregory swayed, his face pale, his breath ragged. Then he crumpled, his metals clattering against the polished floor. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Officers rushed forward. Someone shouted for a medic. Ursula dropped to her knees beside him, clutching his hand, forcing composure while her heart thundered. Around her, the whispers surged, Cheryl's red gown glinting like fire at the edge of the circle. Clear the way, an officer barked as Gregory was lifted onto a stretcher. Ursula rose, her gown torn at the hem, and followed as the Admiral's body was carried through the shocked crowd. The waiting room smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee. Ursula sat stiff-backed, emerald gown creased from hours of worry, her pearls askew at her throat. Every muscle in her body burned from keeping still. The doors hissed open. Janelle Moore walked in quickly, her heels clicking against the tile. She looked stunning even here, tailored navy dress, long blonde hair swept back, determination shining in her eyes. "I want to see Gregory Hale," she said firmly to the nurse at the desk. "I'm family." Ursula rose slowly, her voice clipped. "You are not. I am his wife." Janelle's chin lifted. "I'm the mother of his son." The air thickened. Heads turned. Ursula's pulse hammered, but before she could reply, the doors opened again. Cheryl Morgan slinked in, still in her crimson gown from the ball, heels in her hand, makeup smudged, but her grin sharp as a blade. "Well," she purred, her voice carrying, "don't we make a pretty little picture? Wife. Mistress. Mistress with a child. If Gregory pulls through, someone ought to give him a medal for stamina." It was true, Gregory was 10 years older than Ursula, but he managed to keep 3 women busy. "Cheryl!" Ursula snapped, scandalized, but Cheryl only laughed, delighted in the discomfort spreading across the room. The nurse cleared her throat, her face tight with discomfort. "Mrs. Hale," she said carefully, "the Admiral has been stabilized. The doctor will speak to you shortly." Janelle took a step forward. "And what about me?" she asked. The nurse's expression hardened, professional now. "I'm sorry, ma'am. According to hospital policy, all updates go through the wife. Please wait here." The comment landed like a gavel. Janelle froze, her lips parting as the weight of words sank in. Cheryl's smirk faltered, just for a moment. And Ursula, humiliated so many times, scorned and mocked, felt a quiet, cutting satisfaction unfurl inside her chest. She lifted her chin, smoothing her gown. Then she turned to face the women. "I'll share what's appropriate," she said coolly, turning back toward the double doors. For the first time in years, Ursula felt the authority of her position. Whatever Gregory had done, whatever he had given away, she was the wife. The others would wait outside. Gregory looked small beneath the hospital sheets, the oxygen mask hissing in rhythm with his shallow breaths. His once proud chest, decorated with medals and command, rose and fell like a failing tide. Ursula sat beside him, her back straight, her hands clenched in her lap. She had rehearsed 100 things to say, accusations, pleas, even forgiveness, but when she opened her mouth, only one question came out. "You had a child with her," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," he replied. "I love her." "Why did you stay with me, Gregory?" His eyes fluttered open, bloodshot, half-lidded. For a moment, she thought he hadn't heard. Then he rasped, "For the house." She leaned forward, her heart thudding. "For the house." She was confused. "Your inheritance," he wheezed. "I needed collateral to buy Janelle's home. By the river." His face contorted as he struggled for breath. Ursula's throat closed. Her heart pounded in her ears. Still, she forced her voice steady. "And Cheryl?" A cruel smile flickered across his cracked lips. It was a game for Cheryl. She let you see enough to confuse you. She enjoyed it. He managed to chuckle, but then he began to wheeze and cough. Ursula felt her stomach twist, her hands trembling against the arm of the chair. The walls seemed to tilt around her, the monitors beeping louder, sharper. Gregory coughed in earnest, his chest hitching. His hand fumbled toward the call button, his fingers scraping uselessly at the sheet. For a long moment, Ursula only watched. She thought of her miscarriages, the boy by the river, Cheryl's laughter, the inheritance she had given up to build Gregory's respectable life. All of it is a lie. She hesitated for a couple of minutes. Gregory stared at her in disbelief. Then she pressed the button. The nurse rushed in, adjusting the oxygen, soothing him as Ursula rose. Her face was unreadable as she slipped out of the room, leaving Gregory gasping quietly behind her. The call came in at dawn. Ursula was laying on her bed, still wearing the evening gown from the night before. She was shocked by Gregory's revelation, and she could barely muster the strength to reach for the phone. "Mrs. Hale." The doctor's voice was grave, practiced. "Your husband's condition has worsened. We need you to return to the hospital at once. There are decisions to be made." When Ursula arrived, Janelle was already in the waiting room, her beauty strained with worry. Cheryl lounged against the wall, her crimson gown traded for jeans and a careless smirk. Ursula could not figure out why she returned. The doctor's words were simple. "Mr. Hale's heart is failing. We have placed him on life support, but without it, he may not survive." He hesitated, his eyes softening. "As his wife, the decision is yours." Janelle's lips parted, her eyes shining with helplessness. "Please," she whispered. "He's my son's father." But the doctor did not look at her. He looked at Ursula. The air seemed too thin around her. Gregory was such a narcissist. Ursula was sure he would want to hang on forever, but at what cost? She had no job. This was the right thing to do. It was time to let him go. At first, Ursula thought she might break, sob, or scream. Instead, her voice was clear, almost calm. "No," she said. "Do not prolong his life. He would not want it." She said, looking at Janelle. She was the wife. It was her decision. Janelle covered her face, sobs and tears spilling through her fingers. Cheryl's smile faded into silence. Ursula straightened her shoulders. For the first time in years, she was not the pawn, not the ornament, not the fool. She was the wife. The decision was hers, and she made it. For the next 2 days, Ursula shut out their friends, colleagues, and especially Janelle when they inquired about funeral plans. Ursula signed the cremation authorization with a steady hand. There would be no drawn-out naval memorial, no pageantry, no honors. He deserved none. Just fire. A week later, when the funeral home called, Ursula went alone. The box was light, insultingly so. The weight of his presence, the medals, the uniform, the authority, had been burned away to dust. That night, beneath the weak glow of the funeral home parking lot light, Ursula lifted the lid and emptied Gregory Hale's ashes into the dumpster behind the Chinese restaurant. The dust scattered, gray against noodles, rice, shrimp, and trash. The smell of rot clung in the air. Then Ursula returned to her car. She pulled 2 bottles of water from the trunk. She rinsed out the urn, pouring the gray water in the gutter next to the ally. She rinsed the urn again and watched the last trace of her husband flowing down the gutter until it disappeared down the drain at the corner. When the urn was clean, she took deep breath. It was as though a weight had been lifted. She placed the urn in the trunk, then she drove it to Richmond. At dawn, she set the urn neatly on Janelle's porch. Knocked once. Then she walked away. The next day, Marjorie stopped by with a casserole dish and soft words. "I know it's hard, dear," she said, eyes damp with pity. "But at least you know the truth now. At least you can." "Stop." Ursula's voice was flat. She set the dish down untouched. "It was you, Marjorie. You whispered it. You showed me where to look. You started this." Marjorie blinked, her lips parting. "I was trying to help." "You destroyed what was left of my life," Ursula said, her voice sharp enough to cut. "Leave and don't come back." Marjorie stood frozen, hurt flashing in her eyes. Then she turned and left without another word. Later that night, Ursula sat alone at Gregory's desk, the lamp casting a pool of yellow light across the ledgers and scattered envelopes. Unpaid bills. A second mortgage. Bank accounts drained. Receipts for gifts she'd never seen, trips she'd never taken. The townhouse by the river and her inheritance lost. When she pulled out the folder with their insurance policies, she found that Gregory cashed out the policy that named her as beneficiary to support his lifestyle. There was a smaller policy for the child. Ursula put it in an envelope. He was innocent in all of this. The boy deserved something. But Ursula saw the truth plainly. The little policy wouldn't stretch far. Without Gregory paying the mortgage, Janelle would be forced to work or sell the townhouse. The Riverside dream house would not survive his loss. At first, Ursula felt a twinge of pain at the decision she had made, but she was not willing to shoulder medical bills for a critically ill man who betrayed her. In the end, none of them had security. Not Janelle. Not Cheryl. And certainly not her. The dream house Ursula had lived in was now just evidence of her worst nightmare. It would also have to be sold. She would lose every dime of her inheritance she used as a down payment. The equity was gone, consumed by the second mortgage. What little funds remained would cover only a modest apartment in a cheaper neighborhood. Ursula's fingers trailed over Gregory's signature again and again, her lips pressed into a thin line. Even in death, he left her nothing but ruin. The house Ursula had lived in would have to be sold. She would lose every dime of her inheritance. What little remained would cover only a modest apartment in a cheaper neighborhood. So she packed away her pearls, her gowns, her illusions, and moved into a plain apartment in Newport News, just along the Hampton Bay property line. From her balcony, she could still see the shimmer of water that had once been hers. Now it mocked her, close enough to touch, but never hers again. Gregory was gone. The houses were gone. The money was gone. But Ursula remained. And for the first time in years, she understood that survival was not about clinging to what was lost, it was about building something new. The last box was heavier than it should have been. Ursula wrestled it from the trunk, her arms aching, and carried it up the narrow flight of stairs to her new apartment in Newport News. The room smelled faintly of paint and plaster, a far cry from the polished marble, mahogany, and the sea breezes of her old home. She set the box down, straightened her back, and for a moment simply stood, letting the silence press in. She was alone. Her life empty. She was starting over. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Cheryl. "How about lunch? My treat. You'll want to hear this." Ursula's first instinct was to throw the phone aside. But curiosity gnawed her. After everything, after Gregory, after Janelle, after the ashes, what more could Cheryl possibly want? Still, Ursula was on a tight budget until she found a job. Cheryl wanted to meet at an upscale seaside cafe that Ursula frequented in her former life. The next afternoon, she went. Cheryl was waiting at a cafe along the waterfront, sunglasses perched high, lipstick flawless. She rose with a dazzling smile, kissed the air beside Ursula's cheek, and motioned for her to sit. The waitress came and Cheryl ordered appetizers and cocktails. Ursula scanned the menu looking for the most reasonable item. She shook her head when she realized that this was the first time she ever considered the price of the food. "My treat, remember," Cheryl said. Ursula ordered her regular dish. Cheryl had a lobster bisque and a salad. "Well, darling," Cheryl drawled, leaning back in her chair, "you've had quite the education. Janelle may have broken your life, but I won't let you walk away without learning how the game is played. You deserve that much." Ursula's brow furrowed. "The game?" Cheryl's smile widened. "Oh, come now. You were married to Gregory Hale. You saw how it works. Men want to be adored, needed, and tempted. Women like me don't marry them. We make them pay. We take what we can while it lasts." Her laughter rang out, bright and careless. "Janelle wanted love. You wanted loyalty. And look where it got you both. What about you?" Ursula asked. Once Janelle had the baby, she was first string. I was second string. The most I got out of the deal was some jewelry and few trips. She stopped abruptly. Ursula looked as if she was going to implode. It was the moment she realized that she, Mrs. Gregory Hale, was third string, although she was his life. The only purpose she held in his life was party hostess and collateral for the dream home he created with Janelle. Ursula sat still, her hands folded around her glass. The words stung, but they also sparked a dark flicker of recognition. Perhaps Cheryl was cruel. Perhaps she was careless. But perhaps she was right too. For the first time, Ursula leaned forward. Why don't you tell me about the game? Cheryl's eyes gleamed. That's the spirit. Consider it my gift. After all, he and I did make a sport of tormenting you. The least I can do is give you the rules. She told Ursula about Gregory and Janelle. She had been in the game long before Cheryl met her in Richmond, but she was getting older and she wanted security. When she met Gregory, he was grieving the second miscarriage. She decided she could give him his legacy and gain security. All she had to do was have baby. Ursula bit her lip and fought back the tears that stung her eyes. She only had enough money for a couple of months' rent, and she still hadn't found a job. Cheryl sat back in her chair and smirked. All she had to do was stretch the truth a little, and Ursula was in. She was a little green for the wealthy Toms in Richmond, but she knew of a few small fish in Hampton Bay who would do until she found one. It was Friday evening. Ursula pulled into the Blue Note Cafe parking lot. She got out and smoothed her maroon cocktail dress. She was glad she did not throw out her party dresses. Cheryl assured her they would come in handy. Men liked travel with their mistresses, and there were plenty of evening events involved. Ursula hurried across the lot and opened the door. It was insane that she was hanging out with the woman who helped to wreck her marriage, but she was no longer an officer's wife, and all her former friends were from that crowd. Besides, she was humiliated at the naval ball. She didn't feel like answering questions about her husband. The Blue Note Cafe was buzzing that night, the air warm with laughter and the scent of roasted meats, fine spirits, and fresh bread. Brass light fixtures gleamed over polished wood tables, and from the corner, a small jazz trio played softly, their notes weaving through the clink of glasses. Couples lingered at the bar, and others swayed gently on the dance floor. This, Cheryl said as she slid into a booth near the stage, is Hampton Bay's hunting ground. The Academy boys never outgrow it. Navy men, professors, alumni, they all come here to unwind, to let their guards down. And that, Ursula darling, is when they're easiest to catch. Cheryl said. The booth had a view of the entire venue. Most of the men were with women, but there were a few single men at the bar. Ursula sipped her glass of wine, her eyes drifting across the room. The crowd was respectable, polished, not the scandalous den she had expected from Cheryl's tone. There were men in sports coats, women in dresses, laughter floating up toward the ceiling fans. At a booth near the door sat 4 men in easy conversation. Larry Scarpelli, Jill Chancellor, Takeo James, and Rich Boyd. Cheryl leaned closer, her lips curling into a feline smile. She pointed a fancy acrylic nail that was far too long for any field of work. That is Rich in name only. She flicked her hand dismissively. A professor. Sweet, but nothing to offer beyond dinner and a lecture. Useless for your purposes. You know Takeo. Her laugh was low, edged with scorn. He is too honorable. He's polite with women, but he'll never be their lover. He'd rather play bodyguard. Noble, dull, and not worth the chase. Her gaze sharpened on the other 2. And that magnificent specimen is Jill Chancellor, she said softly, almost reverently. Now there's a true prize. Very rich, well-connected, and respected. He's married, of course, and utterly devoted to Taylor, which only makes him more of a challenge. She smiled slyly. Some men cheat because they're unhappy. Some cheat because they think they never will. That's the real hunt, and I like a challenge. Then her eyes slid to Larry. And Larry, Cheryl's voice warmed, her smile deepening. She sighed. He's an easy mark. He is a wealthy doctor. Generous with money. Engaged, yes, but still technically free, still learning what it means to carry that kind of responsibility. Men like him crave distraction. Someone who makes them feel both desired and indispensable. Her hand reached across the table, brushing Ursula's wrist lightly. That's where you come in. You're beautiful, broken, vulnerable. He'll see you and want to save you. That's your leverage. Ursula's throat tightened. He is engaged, Ursula argued. Cheryl chuckled. He is not married. That makes him fair game. Ursula wanted to recoil, to argue, to say she wasn't like Cheryl. But the image of her small Newport News apartment rose unbidden in her mind, the boxes stacked in the corners, the silence that greeted her when she opened the door. When she looked back, Larry's gaze had lifted from his table. It caught hers across the room. He held it a beat too long, and Ursula did not look away. Cheryl stood up and walked over to the booth. She leaned over Rich and asked Takeo for a dance. He looked at Jill and then got up to dance. Ursula cleared her throat and looked at Larry. He stood up. "Dance?" he asked. "Sure," she replied. He pulled her into his arms as the band began a slow ballad. Ursula needed to be held. She had been treated so poorly. She fought the tears. Larry spent the rest of the evening with her, on the dance floor, at the bar, and then at a hotel. She was far too embarrassed to take him to her apartment, and he couldn't take her to Jill's house, where he was staying for a few days. The affair burned on past Larry's wedding, into the first year, then the second. Trips across the country, hurried weekends in Hampton Bay under the excuse of conferences. Ursula told herself he loved her, that he would never give her up. But Cheryl had other plans for Ursula. One winter evening, at a gathering before the New Year's ball, Ursula and Cheryl slipped away to the powder room. Their voices carried in the tiled space. Cheryl looked back and saw the black velvet ballet flats belonging to a pregnant wife of one of the officers. "So, Larry's been flying back from San Diego every chance he gets?" Cheryl asked with a laugh. "Crystal thinks he's the perfect husband. If only she knew." She looked over her shoulder. The woman in the stall did not move. Ursula smirked, adjusting her lipstick. "She will. Someone has to tell her eventually." "I bet it will happen sooner than you think," Cheryl said with a grin as they headed out the door. Taylor Chancellor's hands were trembling as she washed them. She stepped outside and collapsed against the wall by the restroom. Larry saw her and called Chance. Her face composed, her heart heavy. She said nothing to Crystal when she arrived. Instead, she waited for her husband. "Jill," she whispered, her hand tightening on his arm. "It's Ursula." "And Larry." Jill's jaw clenched, but he didn't explode. He only nodded, his expression dark. "I'll speak to him." The next day was tumultuous. Larry's revelation rocked his marriage. That evening, the Chancellor's house glowed with quiet warmth. Crystal sat with Taylor in the living room, paging through photographs from the academy, laughter threading through their voices. In the study, Jill poured drinks for Larry, Takeo, and Rich, his manner calm, deliberate. "Let's step out for a while," he said. "The blue note's lively tonight." Larry glanced at the clock, uneasy. "Crystal." "She is busy with Taylor," Jill finished. His eyes held Larry's for a beat longer than necessary. "Come." The blue note was more sedate. Recorded soft jazz played over the PA system. There were few couples, single officers clustered at tables and at the bar. Ursula was already there, seated next to Cheryl at the bar in a black silk dress that shimmered beneath the warm lights. She turned, and her face lit up when she saw Larry walk in with the Chance. Her heart leapt. He had come. Perhaps he was choosing her after all. She had been scared when she saw Larry holding Crystal at the ball. They looked happy together. But when Larry approached, his face was drawn, his smile forced. Jill and Takeo lingered just far enough back to give the illusion of privacy while making sure he followed through. Ursula rose to meet him, her lips parting in anticipation. Cheryl was about to make a play for Jill, but Takeo bought her a drink instead. "Larry." He cut her off softly, his voice low, steady but heavy. "Ursula, this has to end." The words landed like a stone in her chest. Her smile faltered. "End? After everything? After 2 years?" Larry's eyes flicked past her, he reflection on his evening with Crystal. "Crystal is my wife. She deserves all of me. I can't keep living 2 lives." Ursula's breath caught, sharp and shallow. "You said I made you feel alive." "You said." "I did," Larry admitted, his eyes full of guilt. "You're fun, Ursula. Wild and exciting. But Crystal is a good wife. She's steady. She wants a family. I can't throw that away." For a moment, the clink of glasses and swell of music felt cruel, mocking. Ursula's hands trembled at her sides, her throat tight with disbelief. She had imagined him walking away from Crystal, choosing her. She had believed he would. Now, in the very place where their affair had begun, he ended it, calmly, firmly, while his friends looked on. Ursula felt the weight of the irony crushing her. Gregory had betrayed a good wife, while Larry had chosen his. Ursula turned away, her vision blurred. She didn't see Cheryl in the far corner, sipping her drink, watching it all unfold with a smirk that bordered on satisfaction. Ursula was ready for the next level, and she had the perfect Tom. From across the room, Cheryl watched it all with a sly smile, already weighing what Ursula's heartbreak might mean for her own schemes. Ursula didn't remember how she got from the blue note to Cheryl's car, only that the tears had dried stiff on her cheeks and her body felt hollow. She thought Cheryl might take her home, leave her to grieve in her new, lonely apartment. But Cheryl had other plans. "You need a change of scenery," Cheryl said, her voice sharp over the hum of the engine. "The blue note is for amateurs. It's where men pretend to be gentlemen. What you need now is Richmond Station." Ursula frowned, exhausted. "And what's that?" Cheryl's smile curved in the dark, feline, and amused. "It is where men go when they don't want to pretend anymore." Richmond Station pulsed with energy, darker, louder than the blue note. The music was wilder, the laughter sharper, the lights dimmer. Couples leaned close in booths half hidden by velvet curtains. Waiters swept past with bottles of champagne, trays of oysters, plates heavy with steak. It was not Hampton Bay respectability. It was money and appetite on open display. Cheryl guided her through the crowd, her hand light on Ursula's arm. "This," she whispered, "is where the real game is played. Forget officers, doctors, and professors. The men here have power. One woman is never enough, and they don't apologize for it." She pulled out her phone and sent a text. At the corner booth, a man rose to greet them. Scott Grayson. 68, silver-haired, his physique still broad and firm beneath his tailored suit. His eyes were sharp, his smile precise, his handshake firm enough to remind her of the strength in his body. A gold ring glinted on his left finger. He was committed to his marriage. She had performed her duty. They had 5 children. He respected Eileen for that. Scott's diamond cufflinks caught the light as he gestured for them to sit. Ursula noted that the diamonds were bigger than her 2-carat engagement ring she kept stowed away in a home safe in case she hit hard times. "Scott is a lawyer," Cheryl purred as she slid into the booth. "A very successful one." Ursula caught the flicker in Cheryl's eyes, the part she wasn't saying aloud. The rumors they both heard in Hampton Bay about Scott Grayson's clientele. He had criminal ties. There were men who stayed free because of Scott's legal acumen. Scott studied Ursula with a lawyer's patience, taking in every detail, the fine cut of her cheekbones, the sorrow tucked in the corners of her eyes, the hint of desperation she tried so hard to hide. She had an air of class and refinement about her. It was something that could not be bought. It took years of home training. "You must be Ursula," he said at last, his voice smooth, practiced. He was soft-spoken, not at all what Ursula expected from a man of his reputation. "Cheryl has told me about you. I'm glad to finally meet you." Cheryl sat down and leaned back, her smile sly. "Ursula has a little experience in the game. She's looking to learn more. And I thought, who better to teach her?" Scott's lips curved into something between a smile and a promise. "I'd be honored to teach her." Ursula felt the ground shift beneath her. This was not Larry, the doctor desperate for distraction, nor Gregory, the husband who betrayed her. Scott Grayson was a different kind of man entirely, older, sharper, dangerous. Men like him didn't just offer gifts in exchange for companionship. They kept women. Ursula trembled once again. She was standing on the edge of a game she barely understood. Scott waved his hand. A large man brought over a tray. It had 3 oddly shaped glasses, a crystal bowl of pink sugar cubes, and a large carafe of water. "This is my man, Rico." "This is Miss Hale." Rico made an awkward bow and poured the green beverage into the base of the glasses. "Will you join us?" "None for me, I am driving," Cheryl said. She cleared her throat and looked away. "That is unfortunate. The evening promises to be quite pleasant," he replied with a gentle smile. Rico placed the spoons and sugar cubes on top of the glasses and turned on the spigot. A few minutes later, the drink had turned opaque. He handed a glass to Ursula. She took a sip. It was like licorice, but very sweet. She sat back and drank more. Cheryl excused herself and went to the bar. A gentleman bought her a glass of wine, and she interviewed him. When she returned to the booth, Ursula and Scott were chatting about his cottage on a sea island off the coast of Virginia. "I am gonna go," she said. "Are you leaving?" Ursula asked. "Well, I have to make a run," she said. "I will be back. Do you want to hang out with Scott for a while?" Ursula looked at Scott. He smiled and she nodded. "I guess." He patted her knee. Then he stood up and gave Cheryl a hug. He slipped a small envelope in her hand for her services. Cheryl leaned over to hug Ursula. "Just do whatever he says, and he will take care of you." Ursula stared at Cheryl as she walked away. When she turned around, Scott pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply. She was trembling when he released her. No one, not Larry and certainly not Gregory, ever made her feel that way. "Why don't you finish your drink?" he asked. She raised the glass and drank the other half. Then Scott waved his hand and Rico returned and led them through the back end of the club to the alley, where a large town car was parked. He opened the door and Scott helped Ursula into the car. Then Rico got into the front seat. Scott pulled Ursula into his arms again and kissed her. She tensed up, but she was afraid to protest. Larry was out of the picture, and she could barely afford her rent with the job she had. "There, that is better. My place is not far from here. Have you had dinner?" "No," she said softly. "Rico, make a call. Tell Cook to prepare a light supper. This is going to be a very pleasant evening. Will you be joined?" 6 months later, Ursula lay in Scott Grayson's arms. His townhouse smelled faintly of cigars and expensive cologne, the sheets smooth and cool beneath her skin. He had given her gifts, taken her to dinners, lifted her from the wreckage Gregory and Larry left behind. He had been kind in his way. But as Scott slept, Ursula's eyes stared at the ceiling. Something inside her felt hollow. The first 3 months with Scott were challenging. He began each evening with the same ritual they shared at Richmond Station. He insisted that she quit her job. He kept her sequestered at his penthouse apartment. She could not leave, even to shop. All her meals were prepared by his cook. His accountant paid her bills. At the end of the 3 months, he rewarded her with a newer module of the car Gregory bought when they first married. By the 6th month, he acquired a condo for her in Hampton Bay proper, not too far from the community where she previously lived. All he required was her complete submission. She had to be available whenever Scott called, day or night. She was allowed to shop and socialize, but other than Cheryl, she had few friends left. He bought her clothes. He paid for the hair and nail salons, but they never went out. Ursula realized that this was a privilege reserved for Scott's wife. She hosted his business functions. He took her out to dinner. After these events, he would take his wife home and then call on Ursula. After 6 months, he spent most nights with Ursula. Quietly, she slipped from the bed, pulled her dress over her shoulders, and sat at the edge to pull on the 4-inch heels. He stirred. "Where are you going?" His voice was low, tired. Ursula turned to him. She shook her head, her hair falling loose across her shoulders. "This isn't me, Scott. I thought maybe it could be, but it feels wrong. I don't want to live like this, pretending we are a couple, taking what isn't mine." He pushed up onto an elbow, frowning. She swallowed, steadying herself. "I think I want to go back to school. Finish my degree. Get a job. Maybe adopt a child. I want to have a family. A real family. Not this." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then Scott sighed, reached out, and rubbed her back in a manner that was almost fatherly. "You're a good woman, Ursula. You deserve something better than this life," he said softly. She kissed his hand once, softly, and left without looking back. A week later, an envelope arrived in the mail. Ursula opened it, and check with a large sum fell to the floor. Ursula gasped. The check was more than enough to cover tuition for 2 years. She could rebuild her life without stress. The signature at the bottom read Eileen Grayson. It was Eileen's way of saying thanks to Ursula for not breaking up her marriage. Ursula's throat tightened as she held the check. For all his flaws, for all her compromises, Scott had loved her in his way. He had wanted to leave his wife for her, but he was too old, and she could not destroy a marriage built over decades. Ursula realized she could not take another woman's husband. She knew how it felt to have her husband slipping away. 6 months later, Ursula stood in a bookstore, gathering the last titles on her syllabus. A new term would start in January. She had returned to college just in time. Another year, and her credits would have been useless, and she was almost finished with her nursing program. Just one more year. When she got home, she spread the books across her small kitchen table, brewed a pot of tea, and opened a book. For the first time in years, her future and the path ahead was hers alone. No secrets. No games. Just a future she was building with her own hands. That evening, at the Blue Note Cafe, Cheryl nursed a glass of wine. Jill Chancellor sat alone near the bar, sipping brandy, his face thoughtful, his wedding ring glinting under the low lights. Cheryl called the bartender over and ordered a scotch for him. He looked over at her. She lifted her glass. Before Jill could answer, the door swung open. Takeo James entered, his presence quiet but commanding. Larry and Rich sat at their regular table. He saw them instantly, crossed the room, and placed a steady hand on Jill's shoulder. He led Gil to the booth for dinner, and then he took his best friend home to his wife. "Taylor's waiting," Takeo said simply. Jill nodded, rising with a faint smile of gratitude. Cheryl's smile froze, then slipped as she watched them leave together. She wanted to throw her shoe at Takeo. She was very close to getting a night with Jill. She sat back, sulking, her drink untouched. Then the door opened again. A shadow lingered in the frame, broad-shouldered, familiar. At the bar, Cheryl Morgan sat in a crimson blouse, her lipstick faded, her nails chipped. She twirled the stem of her glass and stared into the amber swirl of her drink. Once, men had fallen over themselves to buy her a drink, to claim her laughter. Since her stunt at the ball, they all knew she was trouble. The ploy would have worked if Gregory hadn't had a heart attack. Ursula was losing it. Now, the Blue Note waitstaff glanced at her with impatience when she lingered too long over a single glass of wine. Her wallet was nearly empty. Without Gregory's support, she was broke and alone in the very place where she had once reigned. When the bartender set down her bill, Cheryl pulled open her clutch and counted out crumpled bills and coins. Her throat tightened. How far she had fallen. "Still making trouble, Cheryl?" The voice startled her. She turned. An acquaintance stood there, broad-shouldered, older now, but with a warmth in his eyes that made her chest ache. He smiled, not mocking, not cruel, just kind. Cheryl lowered her gaze. For the first time in years, she felt humble. "Not anymore," she said softly. "Not much trouble left in me." He gestured to the bartender, sliding a note across the counter. "Then let me buy this one." The relief in Cheryl's chest was sharp, almost painful. She blinked back tears, nodded once. When they left the Blue Note together, she clung to his arm, not with the triumph of conquest, but with the gratitude of someone who had been spared from sinking completely. Epilogue: 2 women, 2 paths. Ursula adjusted her hospital badge as she hurried down the hospital corridor, her scrubs a far cry from the gowns she once wore to balls and dinners. She was exhausted from her shift, but her heart carried a quiet pride. Each patient she cared for, each chart she filled, was a step toward the life she was building. It was a dream she deferred to create the life Gregory wanted. Her practicum was almost done. Just one more year, and she would be a nurse in full. That evening, she was meeting Cheryl at the Blue Note. The place hadn't changed much. The walls were still blue, there was polished wood, warm lighting, the hum of jazz drifting from the PA system. But the 2 women had. Ursula sat straighter, her smile easy, her eyes no longer haunted. Across from her, Cheryl leaned in with her old familiar laugh, dressed in red once more, her perfume sweet but faint, a glass of champagne in her hand. "I still say the game works, darling," Cheryl teased. "Men will always fall for a pretty face and a clever tongue. You just need to know how to use it." Ursula smiled faintly, sipping her tea. "Maybe once. But not it doesn't last forever." Cheryl rolled her eyes, but Ursula laughed softly. She had walked away from the game. It was only a matter of time before she was replaced by a younger player. Before long, the door opened and Ethan Morales, one of the physician assistants from Ursula's unit, walked in. He spotted her instantly, waved, and crossed the room with an easy grin. "You're late," Ursula said, warmth softening her tone. "Couldn't escape rounds," Ethan replied, setting down his jacket. He gave Cheryl a polite nod before sliding into the booth beside Ursula. Something in Ursula's chest lightened. For the first time in years, she felt the flicker of hope, not in grand gestures or dangerous games, but in quiet companionship, in possibility. He reached over and kissed her cheek. "Are you ready for this weekend?" he asked. "My bags are packed. We can pick them up when I drop off my car." Cheryl watched the two of them, her smile fixed, but her eyes shadowed. "Hot weekend?" she asked cynically. "We are going to Hilton Head. Ursula is going to meet my family," Ethan replied. Cheryl sighed. It had been a while since she had gotten a commission. Most women were not interested in the game. They wanted families. She was thinking of moving to DC. After a beat, Cheryl lifted her glass. "To survival," she said wryly. Ursula lifted her cup of herbal tea. "To new beginnings," she said with a warm smile. They clinked glasses, the sound soft, almost fragile. Ethan reached over and placed his hand on Ursula's belly. She smiled and placed her hand on top of his. At her core, all she ever really wanted was a career and a family. Soon, she would have both. And in that moment, the two women who were once rivals and then co-conspirators sat together in the dim glow of the Blue Note, each carrying her own vision of what it meant to survive. This ends our story. Thanks for stopping by. Please like and share this story and subscribe to our channel. Be sure to stop by for more stories each week. You can find A Second Chance and the other Hampton Bay books at online book retailers. For more information about the Hampton Bay series, visit DeniseNicholsBooks.com.